Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this very special evening of the hustings for the presidential and vice presidential candidates for the Board of Deputies of British Jews. I'm Rabbi Charlie Baginski. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Liberal Judaism, and it really is a pleasure to be able to host this hustings joint with our sister movement, the Reform Movement for Progressive Judaism, and to be able to welcome you all here this evening. It's really important for us to be able to host this hustings. It's a chance not only for our communities to be able to meet the candidates, both the presidential and the vice presidential, but also a chance for those community leaders to be able to engage with the debate and to really ensure that our communities, our deputy representatives, are voting for those candidates that really will represent the progressive voice for our communities to the board, a voice that we consider to be really important. And so thank you very much for being here, for listening to our questions, and for participating in this debate this evening. And I'm going to hand over to Karen Newman, who is going to chair tonight's presidential debate. Karen.
Thank you very much, Charlie. A very warm welcome to everybody. My name is Karen Newman. I'm the co-convener together with Tony Seymour of the Progressive Deputies Group, and it is my privilege to chair the debate between both candidates to be president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the incumbent, the current president, Marie van der Zyl, and the challenger, Jonathan Neumann. The plan is for me to give each candidate 2 minutes to state their case, state why progressive deputies, it is after all the progressive deputies hustings, why progressive deputies should vote for them. Then I'm going to have a series of questions, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank people who submitted questions. We had a lot of questions, and I've tried to telescope them as much as I can into the questions that we will be asking the candidates, and then each candidate will be given 1 minute to close. So with that, and my keenness not to waste any time, I'd like to start with Marie. I'd like to start by giving our current president, Marie van der Zyl, 2 minutes to address the progressive deputies.
Thank you. We Jews have always had to stand up for ourselves. As president, I have stood strong in defence of our communal interests. In his recent court case, Jeremy Corbyn even held me responsible for his losing the Labour whip. Our 10 pledges framed the leadership debate within the Labour Party, but we also stand up for others. We have resolutely campaigned for the Uyghurs suffering unspeakable torment and genocide. If I am only for myself, who am I? We have shown incredible resilience during this pandemic. Despite the many challenges, the board moved seamlessly online. Podcasts, coffee mornings, and hidden treasure programs have been real successes. I campaigned with cross-party support for the Coronavirus Act to include religious burials. During lockdown, I had to intervene, as I had previously, to stop Coroner Mary Hassell's prevention of speedy burial. There is much to celebrate in our community, including the flagship event I co-organised at Buckingham Palace, hosted by the Prince of Wales. I will continue to champion the amazing contributions of our community. Israel has been close to my heart since my grandparents made Aliyah in 1969. We brought together the ambassadors of Israel, the UAE and Bahrain for a Hanukkah event watched by 15,000. We stand up for Israel, celebrate its achievements, counter attempts at delegitimization, and appreciate the plurality of opinion within the board. There is so much more for us to do together. We must ensure the adoption of IRA, strengthen interfaith relationships, and defend Shechita and Mila. Internally, I will ensure deputies' participation is enhanced and views are taken into account before crucial decisions are made. As your president, you've seen I've demonstrated my commitment to you. Please vote for me to continue to stand with you.
Thank you very much, Marie. Jonathan, you are most welcome here. Your 2 minutes begin now. But you're on mute.
That's a good start. Thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you very much to the progressive movements for making these hustings happen. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces, both from within the board and from without. I ran in this election because I think this contest will be good for democracy, good for the Board of Deputies, and good for the community. And all of you attending this evening are a testament to that. I'd like to open by telling you a little bit about myself. I'm a second-generation immigrant from a mixed Ashkenazi Mizrahi family. I went to a non-Jewish school and participated in 2 youth movements as a teenager. At university, I led the Jewish Society, and during my time at JSOC, we oversaw the establishment of a student egalitarian service, the very first progressive Friday night service that the university's Jewish students had ever had. I also served as the JSOC Interfaith Officer, and I was co-president of the university's Interfaith Society. Under my leadership, we won government funding for our work. We promoted scriptural reasoning programs and also a branch of Nisan Hashim, as well as a parallel version of Nisan Hashim for male students. I founded a national student journal with UJS called Elu Ve'elu, These and These, because I've always believed in including different points of view and encouraging debate. I took that same ethos to Limud, where I was involved in and led the history and politics track for several years, bringing a variety of speakers from all over the world. There's plenty more to say about my background, but the time for these opening statements are obviously limited. So I'm just going to end by saying that I've been on the board for 7 years, serving most recently on the Constitution Committee, where as a solicitor by training, I've utilized my expertise in charity law for the good of the board. However, I do have concerns about the lack of opportunities for ordinary deputies at the board. So I've published a manifesto, more extensive and substantive, I would add, than usual manifestos, outlining how I'd like to empower deputies to make meaningful contributions to the work of the board and to our community. It's an exciting platform, and I'm delighted to have support from deputies from every single denomination represented at the board. So I'm looking forward to discussing my plans and your questions this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much indeed. I'd like to start by asking Marie first, what would you say have been your biggest achievements in the board over the last 3 years? You're on mute, Marie.
Apologies. I think the biggest achievement in the last 3 years has to be how we dealt with Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. In his recent court case, Jeremy Corbyn even blamed me for losing the whip. I'm also incredibly proud of the campaign that we have had for the Uyghurs and the recent commission looking at inclusivity for Black Jews and Jews of colour, travelling the length and breadth of the country, going to communities, being with people. They are all things that I think are absolutely incredible, just the everyday things. The reception that we had at Buckingham Palace was amazing because it made all of us feel better at a really difficult time for the community. So there are so many things I could say, but they are some of the highlights. And I also have published a very extensive manifesto with pictures so people can be reminded.
Thank you very much, Marie. Jonathan, your biggest achievements within the board over the last 3 years?
Thanks, Karen. It's a terrific question. I mean, in some ways, I think we kind of backbench deputies are disadvantaged. We don't have as many opportunities to get involved in the work of the board. So, you know, we are quite constricted in that way. But 3 things I would say. First, I've been delighted at how many deputies I've brought in over the years, particularly from underrepresented groups, younger deputies, women deputies, LGBT deputies, and including from the progressive community. So I'm very proud of that. I've been on the Constitution Committee, as I've mentioned, and I think that we have significantly improved our processes in that committee. And finally, I'd say that this campaign, I think, has been also, if I might say, a great achievement in the sense that deputies, I think, have felt quite excluded from a lot of processes. They don't really feel that they have a say. And I think that it's important that at election time, they do have a say about the future direction of the board. So I'm delighted to give deputies that opportunity this time around.
Thank you very much. Next question, I think I'll ask Johnny first, if I may. Can you tell us something about the professional experience that you'll bring to the board as president, maybe other trusteeships, things like that you hold? And could you also include any experience you have with managing relations with the government?
Thank you. Sure. So first, I've been involved in a number of different industries. I've managed property businesses, for example, multi-million-pound property businesses. So there's a managerial experience, financial experience that I intend to bring to the board. I'm a solicitor by training with expertise in private client law, including charity law, which of course I brought to the Constitution Committee and will continue to bring to the board as well. In terms of government relations, I personally lobbied cabinet level ministers to issue guidance against BDS at local councils, which was successful. Not many people can say that they've made tangible changes to the law in this country, so I'm delighted to have been able to do that for the betterment of our community. I have very strong contacts in government, in Downing Street and in Parliament, and I will certainly be utilising those and my media contacts as well at the board.
Thank you. Marie, your professional experience, what you bring to the president, and what your experience of managing relationships with the government, please.
Yeah, I'm going to just say, from my limited time, there are plenty of opportunities for deputies, and I gave Jonathan his opportunity to be on the Constitution Committee myself. I'm 30 years qualified as an employment lawyer, and I'm a partner in the law firm Ince. I've been on the board of deputies now for 6 years. In a managerial position, I was vice president of defence and interfaith relations. I have extensive managerial experience from my employment law and also my government experience. Even today, I've been to see James Cleverly. It's totally not true what Jonathan has said. We don't have good relations with the government. I've recently seen Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, and also Eric Pickles. We have day-to-day contact with the government, and Jonathan hasn't named actually any members of government he has contact with. And when he said yesterday's hustings, we don't have good relations because of Robert Halfon, that is an MP, and that was resolved a long time ago. So I don't accept anything that Jonathan has said yesterday, I'm afraid.
Thank you. The third question I had, which I want to ask Jonathan first, is the board exists to represent all British Jews. Could you explain how your candidacy fosters consensus and how you would claim to represent all British Jews?
Absolutely. I'm delighted. As I said earlier, I have support from deputies from all political backgrounds, religious affiliations, deputies from every single denomination represented at the board. I'm very proud of that. If I didn't have that, then I wouldn't feel qualified to do this job. The president of the board has to represent the entirety of the community, and I'm delighted at the broad support that I have. And I believe that those who know me best, which is why they're supporting me, believe that I can be a unifying candidate and that I can support all parts of our community.
Thank you. And thank you for your brevity. It's much appreciated. Marie, can you explain how your candidacy fosters consensus and how you would claim to represent all British Jews?
I think that anyone will see from how I've worked that I have represented all of the community, all the denominations, and I work extremely well with the Haredi community. I've certainly not written any book demonizing American progressive Jews and then saying they're just American Jews, not English ones. I have made sure that I'm absolutely there for everyone. I've made sure that we also upkeep and we defend all of the religious traditions, and that's for every single denomination. I've travelled to every shul, and I've been there for absolutely every Jew throughout the whole of my time. And that's what's necessary to be the president of the Board of Deputies. You have to have the confidence of every single denomination, and having unity does not mean writing books trying to demonize a certain section of the community, because that's nothing but offensive to try and pass it off as anything else.
Thank you, Marie. Jonathan, it's the elephant on the table. So I do need to ask you this question straight on. You are the author of a book which is called To Heal the World, ? And it says that how the Jewish left corrupts Judaism and endangers Israel. The question I want to ask you, apart from giving publicity to your book, which I hope you're grateful that I've just done, the question I want to ask you is it possible for somebody who is attacked Reform and liberal Judaism to lead an organization like the Board of Deputies?
Well, the simple answer to your question is that I think that if anyone who explicitly attacks the movement for Reform Judaism or liberal Judaism or indeed Masorti Judaism, and for that matter, the United Synagogue or the Federation or any part of our major communal players and movements, I think they would have a hard time leading the board. But I've written a best-selling book that's published by one of the biggest and most reputable publishers in the world about American Judaism. It's an analytical book. It's got won accolades from the leading Judaic professors at Harvard, who said that it opens a window to a conception of Judaism that is broader, less partisan, and spiritually richer than many American Jews have ever known. You don't get accolades like that from the leading Judaic studies professors in the world if you don't write rigorously analytical books. I was in advanced talks with academic publishers to publish the book as well. So this is, for those interested in American Judaism, by all means, pick up a copy of the book. I think it's important that we don't judge books by their cover. That's the sort of thing that we learn in primary school, I think.
It wasn't so much the cover, it was the title. It's the idea of the Jewish left corrupting Judaism, when a lot of our deputies, a lot of people on this call are proudly of the Jewish left. I think that's the question. I'm going to ask Marie to give a kind of perspective on the question, which was whether it's possible for somebody who's attacked reform and liberal Judaism to lead an organization like the Board of Deputies. But then I will give you a very, very short chance to come back, Johnny.
Thank you.
I know Jonathan is saying that he's got a couple of progressive followers, but I think they'd be a handful. I think it's absolutely offensive to write a book condemning conservative Jews, trying to pass them off as just American and saying, oh, they're different to these Jews here. We also work very closely with our international partners and funders at the World Jewish Congress. They're very important. They give the board the majority of our money, and we work very hard to fight anti-Semitism and work with them. They are those conservative American Jews that have been absolutely offended. And I do not see how anyone can be president of the board having written such a divisive book and then claim to bring unity. I find it absolutely offensive. And I don't understand why he doesn't appreciate the offence caused and try to address that, rather than to try and say it's a bestseller. And by the way, no figures have been given whatsoever to even substantiate that.
Thank you, Marie. I think for a lot of us, Jonathan, particularly young people, the concept of tikkun olam, the concept of leading an ethical life, is at the center of their Judaism. And I think that's what progressive deputies find very, very difficult to grapple with in terms of your book. So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to address that.
Okay, there's quite a lot to unpack between all those various statements. I might need more than a few seconds. Firstly, obviously, I am among those younger deputies. I'd probably be the youngest president ever elected to the board, I think. So, I am among those younger deputies. I would also take issue with the notion that it's just a couple of progressive deputies who are behind me. Half my campaign team was progressive, are progressive Jews and progressive deputies. So I take issue with that, and I don't think they would take particularly kindly to that either. And I think it's important to say that the book is written in an American idiom. We are divided. Britain and America is often said are divided by a common language. Having written and been published in periodicals in both sides of the Atlantic, that is absolutely true. I have to write in a different style for an American audience. That's simply the way. And you can see that from the publisher's title and the publisher's subtitle of the book. They are in an American idiom. That is the style of American publishing. It is not the style of British publishing, and that is a difference. I've spoken on the book in progressive as well as orthodox and unaffiliated audiences from New York to California. I spoke on it at a flagship progressive synagogue, one of America's flagship progressive synagogues, and the books that were available on sale.
Johnny, if I may.
I'll just say that the books that are on sale at that event sold out. People are interested in the debate and they want to engage in it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move now to some questions that were submitted. I've got one here from Joe Grabina. What will you do for currently underrepresented groups on the board, such as women, Jews of colour, and LGBT plus Jews? And I would add to that the question that just came up: how will you ensure that people with disabilities are encouraged to serve on the board as deputies or officers, because people with disabilities are underrepresented and without a voice at the moment? Thank you to Owen Power, a National Officer of Liberal Judaism, for asking us to raise that, in addition to the person who came up in the chat recently. So the question is, what will you do for currently underrepresented groups on the board: women, Jews of colour, and LGBT plus Jews, and also Jews with disabilities? Marie, could you go first?
Yes, you may have noticed I struggled to speak very fast because I'm a person with a disability. I have only one part of the vocal cord left, and I can absolutely say we need to do more. When we have finished the Commission for Inclusion of Black Jews and Inclusivity, that was a very good suggestion that we've had also about looking to see if we can do a commission for those Jews with disabilities across the community. That would be a major project, and we'd also have to consider that. In relation to underrepresentation, this is a very important issue. I propose an impact assessment be carried out in the next triennium where we can clearly identify where we need to get more deputies. But I would like to say women have got a proud history at the board. I'm only the first woman to stand for a second term, and we have had VPs and a CEO, but we clearly need to make sure we get more Black Jews. We have now got our first deputy, but we can do more and have a youth trustee as well. So all of those things need to happen and are very important. And sorry, it's very short answered.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate your keeping to time. So, Jonathan, what will you do for currently unrepresented groups on the board, such as women, Jews of colour, LGBT plus Jews, and also people with disabilities participating as deputies?
Yeah, thank you. I think it was Joe Wright who asked the question. It's a very important question. As I mentioned before, I'm very proud of my record of bringing in new deputies to the board over the years: women deputies, young deputies, LGBTQ plus deputies. There's obviously a great deal to be said about each of these groups. Women deputies only account for about 30% of deputies at the board, and only about 25% of speeches are given by women deputies. We only have 2 women deputies standing for honorary officer positions this cycle, compared to several more in the last cycle. We have to ask why that is. We have to ask why more women are not coming forward. I want to see more women brought to the board. I want to empower our equalities champion to encourage our affiliated organizations to send deputies who represent the entire diversity of their communities. But we also have to listen to women who are already at the board. A lot of women are telling me they don't really feel like they're being listened to. In terms of Jews of color, I'm the only, as far as I know, the only Jew of Mizrahi heritage to be running in this election. So I'll be very proud to continue that tradition with Edwin standing down.
Thank you. Next question. I'm grateful to Ben Lewis for submitting this question. What would you do to increase the representation of the younger members of the community at the board? And in particular, how would you go about engaging young British Jews, particularly those who are engaged in Jewish social action projects at the moment? Johnny, do you want to go first on that one?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Ben, for the question. This is obviously something very close to my heart. As I said, obviously, I'm one of the sort of youngerish deputies at the board and would be the youngest president, I think, if elected ever at the board. There are a couple of things. The first is I'd like to establish an under 35 assembly with an elected chair. And I'd like that assembly to actually engage in meaningful and real work to contribute to the betterment of our community, and particularly with younger sections of our community. So, for example, with pupils, essay writing competitions, volunteering opportunities and awards, with students to work closely with UJS, potentially establishing a national student journal for reasoned debate among students, and also initiatives for graduates and young professionals, who I think have actually the least formalized infrastructure of any demographic in our community. So that's on the kind of substantive side. And then on the symbolic side, I think it would be an enormous step forward for our community to elect a younger person to the leadership. We're behind the curve on this. Australia, South Africa, they've been electing and appointing young people to positions of leadership for many years. Fact is, the leaders of tomorrow can be the leaders of today.
Thank you. Marie, what would you do to increase the representation of younger members of the community at the board?
I had been campaigning earlier this year to make sure that we have, for the first time, a youth trustee at the table, to make sure it's not somebody just sitting there, it's actually somebody who's got a management role. We would like to have a youth council, which is quite similar to our regional council, with an elected chair, and either to have a place at the executive, or I would hope in time to become a trustee, so that youth are no longer viewed as token. I think it's very important that we welcome organisations joining. I was very concerned at last meeting, a number of people tried to vote down a youth organisation, particularly Maccabi, which is fantastic. We have to get those youth organisations in, because then we have a lot of people that we can work with, and we can consult with them and see what they want and what they would feel would be good. I would also like to have sixth form schools coming to the board. I think that would be very exciting. We've already had some discussions with that, and to continue with our equalities champion.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. This question comes from my good friend David Silo in Brighton. What is your leadership style in decision making? Do you dictate from the top, or do you involve all communal organizations to achieve agreement and consensus across our diverse communities? So what is your leadership style in decision making? Marie?
It's been a fantastic time, a triennium with the honorary officers. We meet every single Friday. We have discussed absolutely everything. We have WhatsApp. So between the trustees, it's been absolutely incredible. I think people forget, though, that the board is not a bubble. We have to work with the Jewish Leadership Council and the CST, who also do fantastic work. So whilst the deputies might want to think that they're going to decide everything, we have to actually work within a framework, within the community, because we're all on the same side. We also, as I say, work very closely with the World Jewish Congress and the European Jewish Congress. So we have to make sure that we consult everybody externally and internally. We can't just decide that we're going to set policy and disregard everybody else. There are key figures in the government that we work with, and also people like Lord Mann, who will want to make sure that we are all coordinated. So I think that probably might not be understood, but that cooperation and collaboration at all levels is essential.
Thank you, Marie. Jonathan, something about your leadership style.
Thank you, David, for the question. I have always been, by temperament, and will continue to be, collegiate and inclusive. That's always the attitude that I've brought to all the programs that I've run, whether they were at Limud or in the United Synagogue, or even back in university days, or anywhere else. I have opinions of my own. I have always been absolutely willing and interested to hear the opinions of others, and I'm always open to being persuaded, to compromise, and that's how I've always been, and that's how I will continue to be. I also believe in collaborating with all of the movements and organizations in our community. The very first thing I did, almost first thing I did, was to reach out when I announced my candidacy, was to reach out to all of the denominations in our community to hear from them about the concerns in their and interest in their denominations and their movements. But finally, the main thrust of my manifesto and the main thrust of my platform is to empower deputies. I want to hear from ordinary deputies about the issues that they care about, and to utilize and leverage their expertise for the betterment of our community. And that's absolutely the way that I'd like to lead the board.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. Now I'd like to ask you a question that addresses, I don't know whether it's a sense that both of you have, but I've been a deputy for quite a few years, and my sense is that recently there's become quite a sort of aggressive, not exactly tribal, but sometimes quite nasty atmosphere pervading what should be a discussion and turning it into something much, much, much more atavistic. So my question to you both is, have either of you ever been part of a caucus or a specific faction within the board? And what will you do to try and grapple with the 4 Jews, 5 opinions, which we all understand, which now is something really a little more nasty? There was a story today in the JC which has a bit of that nasty tone that I'm talking about here. Have you ever been part of a specific caucus or faction? And what will you do to address that specific atmosphere so that we can become one board of deputies again? Johnny, would you go first?
Sure. Thank you, Karen. I've been involved in a number of different groups at the board. There are plenty of groups at the board. There is also, of course, a progressive caucus at the board. I'm not personally a member of that, but I welcome any groups that enable deputies to speak to one another, to interact, to form friendships. Certainly, I, through the board, have formed lifelong friendships with deputies from different parts of the country, from different denominations, different age groups that I wouldn't otherwise. So I think that these sorts of initiatives are no bad thing. I don't think that that's where the rancor comes from. I think where the rancor, and I agree with you, there has been this divisiveness. I think where it comes from is that we're not focusing. We focus on the 10% of issues that we disagree on, instead of the 90% of issues that actually unite Anglo Jewry. And those are the things that I want to focus on. Issues like mental health and social care and housing and planning, and practical issues that affect British Jewry, that we really all agree on, and that we can utilize the skills of deputies to advance. If we focus on the things we agree on, then the temperature will be brought down.
Thank you, Johnny. So Marie, to you, have you ever been part of a caucus or specific faction? And what would you have to say about healing this rather nasty atmosphere that we seem to be dealing with at the moment?
I'm not a member of any caucus or WhatsApp group. Many years ago, I did used to go to the progressive caucus, but it didn't have, like the right-wing caucus, a set of principles that their members were secretly voting on. And the one led by Jonathan Neumann, the fifth principle, is that the board should only do work which affects Jews in the UK and Israel. And to me, Tikkun Olam is extremely important, and social justice is a way, of course, that all Jews can unite. Even people that have been on the executive have been in this caucus, and of course it doesn't help because it's also housed a suspended deputy. All of this hasn't been known, and everything that we've been doing has clearly been wanting to be voted and voted down, even the 6 organisations to join. And I think that there needs to be transparency if there are going to be caucuses like that with political aims, because that's what this caucus actually is. It's got political aims, and that's not in the interest of the Jewish community. And all deputies are meant to represent their constituencies and act in the best interests of the community at large.
Johnny, I want to ask a follow-up question to this, if I may. I think there is a view being expressed by one faction within the board that the board should confine its concerns to things which either directly affect the British Jewish population or Israel. And there are a lot of British Jews who actually feel it's really important for us to represent to the great British public that we care about things beyond our parochial issues. So that's why some people felt it was really important that the issue that Marie led with the Uyghurs and us showing that we're concerned with other issues. I'd like to get a feel, I'd like to give progressive deputies a feel for how you respond to people who really care about us showing the British public that we do care about that and taking our place as part of the national debate on issues that don't just concern us.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree on the need for transparency. That's why these sorts of points that this group has, that is the platform that my constituency elect me on. That is the worldview that they would like me to bring to the board. And the point is that generally,
sorry, what worldview? Can you just clarify that?
As in what you've said, as in the idea that the Board of Deputies of British Jews, its primary focus should be British Jews, advocating for British Jews, safeguarding and celebrating the diversity of Jewish life in this community. I don't believe that the Board of Deputies should become a pointless Israel debating society. And I do believe, by the way, that there will be times where the board. Well, firstly, of course, we need to collaborate with other minority groups, faith groups, and ethnic groups in the country. That's absolutely part of our mandate. And there will be times where we do select to take campaigns that go beyond our interests. For example, the Uyghur campaign. What I would like to see, however, is that those sorts of campaigns come to deputies for votes. They're very noble, and absolutely, I'm committed to continuing the Uyghur campaign. I think it would have been a stronger campaign if we had brought it to deputies in the first instance for discussion, for debate, and for a vote to decide that this is the campaign we want to go ahead with.
Because I'm really objecting to that. I'm sorry to ask you to respond. It started off originally when I wrote a letter to the Chinese ambassador in February. It wasn't ever a campaign, and everybody on the executive and all of the deputies knew exactly what we were doing. It's not something we set off and said, let's do a campaign for the Uyghurs. It's something that developed because that's how it happened, and the trade bill came along, and we objected to some of the proposals in there. So it's not something that we've sat down and planned at the beginning of the year, and no deputies started writing in. There's no secrets at the board. Everybody knows what we're doing, and lots of deputies have had so many chances to do initiatives. This is a very negative campaign trying to get deputies to feel that they're worthless, and deputies are not worthless, and so many have done so many good things. And I want to make sure that deputies have a much greater chance to do initiatives, and our new website has got a space where deputies can carry out those initiatives, and that's been delayed, but that's been put out this week, and it will continue to develop.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. We're nearing the end of our time, but I'm hoping to squeeze in 2 more questions. So some of you will have noticed that we haven't said the word Israel up until now, and that there's a reason for that. But now I'm going to ask both of you a question about Israel. Despite the recent election of the first progressive rabbi as a member of the Knesset, a progressive Judaism in Israel is still sidelined. How would you as president be an ally of the rights of all Jews to practice their Judaism freely in Israel? Marie.
I absolutely think that Jews should practice their freedom in Israel, and I have proudly raised this with President Rivlin and Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think that is extremely important, and there's no question that the rights of Jews, particularly also at the wall and in relation to conversion, that is something that isn't negotiable as far as I'm concerned. We have to make every effort to ensure there is that respect. And I would like to see Jews being able to freely get married in Israel, not having to go to countries like Cyprus. And I hope that the attitude to progressive Jews is going to change. I'm very proud to advocate for that.
Thank you, Johnny. The right, being an ally of the right of all Jews to practice their Judaism freely in Israel.
Yeah, I mean, Rabbi Kariv's election with the Avodah, the Labour Party, is a momentous moment, I think, in Israeli history. I actually heard him. He spoke at the Progressive Yom Ha'atzmaut celebration. He spoke very eloquently. There is no doubt that there is a disparity between the Orthodox and the Progressive. There's also a separate disparity between the Haredi community and the non-Haredi Orthodox community as well, but a much larger one between the Orthodox and the Progressive in Israel. Progressive rabbis, for example, don't get the same stipend that Orthodox rabbis do. Of course, there was a momentous Supreme Court ruling recently about the recognition of progressive converts in Israel for the purposes of the law of return. So, you know, there are absolutely disparities. My general view is that we don't get involved in Israeli internal affairs, but this is absolutely one of the exceptions to that. It's absolutely right that the Board of Deputies, in concert with other diaspora partners, makes representations to the Israeli government to ensure that these sorts of issues that do impact diaspora Jews and British Jews are very much represented to the Israeli government. Absolutely.
Thank you both very much. I neglected to thank Ben Lewis for that question. I want to thank everybody for the questions. We had a lot more questions than I've been able to ask. And this is my last one, and I hope it will be a quick one before again giving both candidates a 1 minute to wrap up. And the last question is, will you implement the recommendation of the report of the Board of Deputies Commission on Racial Inclusivity in the Jewish Community? Jonathan, will you implement it?
Thank you. Well, look, this, you know, as a Jew of Mizrahi heritage, I have, despite the way that I look, I have been a victim of racist attitudes in the Jewish community in the past, and because of the way that I look, I've also been witness to that sort of racism towards third parties when people don't realize sort of who's around, and if I, given the way that I look, experience that sort of thing, that's only scratching the surface of what some of our fellow Jews of color experience who don't look like me. So this report has personal resonance for me. I think it's communally incredibly significant, but I absolutely agree with Stephen Bush that we need to engage with the report critically. All different movements and organizations will have different ways of responding to it. He mentions, for example, that the United Synagogue and Liberal Judaism both conducted their own separate listening exercises with their own members of color. I think it was on terminology, and they came to different conclusions. You know, that's absolutely fine. I think this report needs to be a moment for all organizations and communities to decide how they can be more inclusive. There are certainly things that we can be doing more at the board that we discussed earlier, and plenty more to discuss as well. The report itself has mechanisms in 2 years and 7 years time for next steps, but absolutely we should be recommending and encouraging the implementation.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Maria, I'm going to abuse my position as the chair and just say, as a progressive deputy, I was incredibly proud of the board for being so quick out of the starting blocks for getting the commission underway under your leadership. I really want to say that. But over to you. Will you implement the recommendations of the report?
Absolutely. This is amongst our proudest work. Look, no community is immune from the scourge of prejudice. Ours is no exception. And as society as a whole, we've sought to examine racial diversity, and Black members of our own Jewish community came forward and they told us, whilst there were many wonderful things about being Black and Jewish, they experienced far too many instances of marginalization and discrimination. So the combined challenges we had of defining commission terms, listening to witnesses, consulting communal stakeholders, producing deliverable recommendations for organisations are also heavily dependent on volunteers. We are drawing up an action plan at present, and thanks to Stephen Bush's immense skill and generosity with his time, we've been able to share the Commission's findings, and we're very proud that we as a community are now taking ownership of these challenges, and that institutions throughout our community are not going to dodge the problems presented to them by the Commission, and we've seen an outpouring of goodwill, and that's truly admirable and makes me proud to be a British Jew.
Thank you both very much indeed. We're very close to the end of our time, and I'm going to give you both 1 minute, and I'm going to start with you, Jonathan. Why should progressive deputies vote for you as president of the Board of Deputies?
Well, thank you, Karen, and thank you very much for a spirited debate. Thanks to Karen, thanks to Marie, thanks to everyone participating and watching. Also, thanks particularly to those from Liberal Judaism for coming on the eve of your biennial. I hope it goes well over the coming days, and hopefully next year you'll be able to meet in person. Now, I'm very excited about the campaign that we're running. I'm proud to have support from deputies, not to mention ordinary members of the community from every denomination represented at the board. Over the years and behind the scenes, I've successfully encouraged shuls and deputies from every single denomination to join the board, including, as I said before, women deputies, young deputies, LGBT deputies, because the board has to look like and speak like the community as a whole. Half my campaign team, as I mentioned before, are progressive deputies. The progressive community should absolutely rest assured that progressive interests will have equal treatment to other interests of the board if I am elected. I hope deputies will be as excited as I am about the platform that I'm offering, giving opportunities for deputies to make meaningful contributions to the board and our community. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. Marie, why should progressive deputies return you for a second term as our president?
I am, and I've demonstrated that I am a president. I'm here for all Jews. I'm a centrist, and I haven't written a book trying to demonize the progressive part of the community and passing them off as American Jews. 3 years on into my presidency, I've never been so proud to be a British Jew. Our community really has shown its characteristic resilience, whether through fighting anti-Semitism in the Labour Party or through daily determination. During the pandemic, we've had disproportionate losses, but as a community, we keep standing up and we choose creatively to celebrate our Jewish way of life. And we continue to stand up for Israel and others, including the Uyghur Muslims. The next few years will be vital for our community. The board must stay relevant to meet these challenges. I will continue to work tirelessly for our whole community, as I have done through the anti-Semitism crisis, through the pandemic, and through the last years with you. I'm a president for all Jews, not just some.
Thank you, Marie, very much. Thank you, Jonathan, very much. And at 2 minutes overdue, I'm going to hand the chair over to Tony. But I would like to thank you both for the spirit in which you've conducted this debate and the warmth with which you've shared your perspectives with progressive deputies. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. I assume you can hear me okay? Just say yes, right, okay. Right, the Vice President Hustings, we have 5 candidates for 3 Vice President positions. They are Amanda Bowman, who's a Deputy for Hampshire Synagogue, David Mendoza-Wolfson, Deputy for Reform Judaism, Gary Mon, Deputy for JNF, Richard Cohen, Deputy for Loughton, Chigwell and District Synagogue, and Stuart MacDonald, Deputy for Liberal Judaism. The format is the same as Karen's. I'll very quickly go through that. So each candidate will have 2 minutes to make opening remarks, and then they'll have 1 minute to answer each question. And at the end, they'll have 1 minute for closing remarks as well. The remainder of the time will be used for taking questions. The questions have all been submitted and are being submitted through Slido, and I will use that accordingly to choose the questions. So as I mentioned, candidates will have 1 minute to respond to questions. So what we'll do now is immediately we'll start with the opening remarks by the candidates. And the first candidate to start the opening remarks will be Amanda.
Thank you, Tony. Am I waiting for it? Yeah, it's been a great honour to represent our community as Vice President of the board. It's been a challenging 3 years, but together we've achieved a great deal, and there's more to do. Tonight, I'm going to focus on 3 things. Firstly, my track record. I've been given the responsibility of the Defence Division, and it's been full on. Now, after the painful Corbyn years, the EHRC's damning verdict provides a template against which we can and will judge Keir Starmer's commitment to tackling anti-Semitism. I've promoted ARA adoption by councils, universities and Plaid Cymru, and contributed to the online harms bill. I've protected Jewish interests in the new organ donation scheme and through the introduction of medical examiners, and worked closely with UJS to protect Jewish students on campus. Throughout, I've worked with both staff and deputies in and beyond my division. As past Vice Chair of the Communities Division, the board's Gender Equality Champion, Chair of BODSA, and part of the Women's Group leadership, I work with deputies raising and tackling social justice issues and inequalities, and I'm proud of that work. Secondly, my plan. Of course, I'll continue to protect the freedoms, rights, and security of British Jews. But that's not enough. We must look outside our community to be active allies and build bridges across faith groups with our communal organisations and, of course, with our deputies, young and old, men and women of all denominations across our nation, to deliver our work in a spirit of openness, transparency, and respect. One thing I've heard loud and clear during the campaign is that deputies have more to give and they want to give it. I'll expand our skills and expertise register so that every deputy has the chance to tell us what they bring to the board, what they care about, and how they want to be involved. I've engaged deputies in everything I've done so far. I know deputies are our greatest resource. And thirdly, the need for change. The board must evolve in a way that deputies feels works and through consensus. We can then attract more members, both from the mainstream and from underrepresented groups, and be even more effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. David?
Yeah, sorry, I was waiting for the timer. I'm proud to be a progressive Jew. I've been a member of Edgware and Hendon Reformed Synagogue since birth. It's where I had my bar mitzvah, where I trained to be a youth leader, where I taught at Cheder, where I'm now a trustee. And as a deputy for Reformed Judaism, I get the honour of representing the whole movement at the board. I get to give back to the communities that have done so much to form who I am as a Jew. I'm running to be vice president of the board because I want to continue giving back to our community. I believe I have the skills, the experience, and the passion to create a truly representative board fit for the future. I will work to make sure that the board meaningfully engages with all deputies and gives them the opportunity to help formulate and guide board policy. Through project groups, debating divisional direction at plenaries, and real consultation to find out where deputies and their constituencies stand on the things that matter to our community. And I'll work to make sure that this is a board fit for the future. This means a board with hybrid meetings, allowing deputies to engage equally no matter where in the country they are, with a youth assembly, with its chair on the executive, and with proper support for communities outside of North West London. Through my professional experience at Barnet Council, CST, UN Watch, as president of a Students' Union, I've worked to support the Jewish community through building bridges with interfaith groups and those combating hate crimes, through fighting anti-Semitism, and by assisting our communities throughout the pandemic and towards recovery. As Vice President, I will continue to stand up for our community, supported in fighting hatred and in making allies, to ensure that this country is a safe place to live and worship as a Jew, no matter what your Judaism looks like. If you vote for me to be Vice President, I will work tirelessly to build a more representative board of deputies fit for the future.
Thank you very much, David. Gary?
I want to begin by referring to my progressive credentials. I'm a member of Westminster Synagogue, which I rejoined 2 years ago after having been a member for 17 years as a single man between 1983 and 2000, for much of which time the rabbi was the late Albert Friedlander of blessed memory, from whom I took a lot of inspiration. I have the greatest of respect for my four fellow candidates, yet it is clear, if you read all of our manifestos, that what sets me apart is that I am the change candidate. My colleagues appear to be broadly happy with the way the board is run, only proposing small tweaks here and there. I would want, if I could, to make wholesale changes. First, all major board decisions which are not time sensitive should only be implemented as board policy after approval by deputies at a meeting. From the last 3 years, a few examples might include our policy on Chinese Uyghurs, our opposition to the government's benefits policies, our support for the Holocaust Memorial near Parliament Square, and our strategy on the environment. Those issues should be put to a vote of deputies rather than merely being adopted as board policy by the 5 honorary officers. This approach will make deputies engaged and will move us away from the feeling held by so many deputies that they're merely wallpaper. Second, the 64 deputies who serve on divisions must be made to feel useful and be given roles. And it's important to identify what these roles might be so that work is done not just by the staff, however excellent they may be, but also by deputies. If I have the honour of being elected the Vice President, I would seek a meeting with the President, the CEO, and the relevant board staff to try to identify the roles that deputies that will be elected in July to my division might perform so that they have very useful and enjoyable experiences which are of benefit to the board. Finally, it's no secret that the board is bitterly divided at present. Whoever wins this election must try to unite us, because what we have in common is infinitely greater than what divides us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. Richard, we seem to have lost the timer at the moment. So Leo, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, Richard, go on, start.
Good evening. I was brought up, first third of my life, I was brought up in the Reform Shul at Middlesex New in Bessborough Road, which is now called the Mosaic Synagogue, and I know that they're moving to Stanmore shortly. I wish them every good fortune. I actually shared my bar mitzvah with Rabbi Jonathan Romaine way back in 1968. I had the pleasure of chairing a Jewish Historical Society's a presentation made by him about the history of Reform Judaism recently. Our next guest is Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, who's going to talk to us about Masorti Judaism. And in October, we'll be privileged to host Rabbi Charlie Baginski, who's going to talk to us about the history of liberal Judaism. I have a liking for liberalism generally. I am an historian when I'm not a lawyer. Just briefly, I would say that the three most prominent liberal politicians are William Gladstone, whose reputation has been somewhat sullied of late by his family's association with slavery, which is rather unfair because he never supported it himself. Lloyd George, who somewhat betrayed his marital vows, and thirdly, Winston Churchill. And the reason I mention Winston Churchill is that he had a word or two to say about Tikkun Olam. He said, "What's the point of life? What is the use of living unless it is to strive after noble causes and to make this world a better place when we leave it than when we joined it?" That's the best way of putting ourselves into touch with the divine and eternal verities. So I believe that it's not just a liberal mantra, that it's a doctrine for all. And through belief in interfaith and Deputies discuss, which is enables deputies to carry on talking after plenaries. That's the kind of candidate I wish to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And finally, Stuart.
Oh, Tony, what a pleasure. We've been working together for the last 3 years. You as the vice chair, me heading the FNO. I've been deputy for Liberal Judaism for a dozen years, the board's treasurer, and a pretty robust voice for the progressive interest amongst the honorary officers for the last 6. I think my 2 terms have been moderately successful. We're in surplus again. We're in pretty good shape financially and operationally, in spite of what some people say. And look, I've been nominated by deputies from right across the political and denominational spectrum. My views are firm. They're fairly well known. No compromise on discrimination based on race, gender, sexuality, disability, or denomination. Strong and constructive support for Israel. Anti-Semitism, no compromise. Tikkun Olam, yes, please. To me, sectional interests are a diversion. Let's focus on what unites us, like our love for the community in all its diversity. For our advocacy work on fighting anti-Semitism, defense of Israel and religious practice, on education, interfaith, social action. My progressive agenda for change is what most deputies want, empowering women, youth, the regions, so important, women's and young deputies councils with real authority and real teeth, growing our regional presence from the Northwest to Scotland and elsewhere, a real voice for deputies with real feedback, real debate, more of a voice at plenaries, good governance, where in order to have a constitution fit for purpose, we stop pretending there are quick fixes, fighting anti-Semitism as we continue to do, and a voice for justice, whether it be the Uyghurs, the Mizrahis, or pursuing the recommendations of the Bush report. If you want a vice president who is simply focused on getting the job done, give me your vote.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Now we'll come on to the questions. You'll probably notice that some of the questions are the same as the questions to the presidential candidates as well, but that's just the way that they came out. So please remember, you have 1 minute to answer the questions. We haven't got very long, and I'm not going to get through many of the questions that we've had. So let's start straight away. First question. What are the 3 things you would focus on specifically to meet the needs of Reform and liberal Jews? And we're starting with Amanda on that.
Well, the first thing I'd say is that the Board of Deputies is the Board of Deputies of British Jews. It's not the Board of Deputies of Orthodox Jews. It's the Board of Deputies for all Jewish people. And so the 3 things that I'd focus on would be the same things I focus on for all Jews. Although I have to say, of course, from talking with Reform and Liberal and Masorti Jews, there are things that you may hold closer to you than those for others. I want to know I'd want to know exactly what it is that you would like us to focus on. I think I have an idea, but from talking with you, but I haven't asked specifically what those things are. What I do want to say is that when it comes to social justice and social action, it runs through me like Brighton Rock. My career has been built on serving other people and working on social action and volunteering. And the first thing I did when I joined the board was get involved with BODSA and social action. And so
Okay.
I would certainly do that.
Thank you, Amanda. Richard?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, discrimination. This is a strong liberal value, that any discrimination against people in terms of their sex or sexual orientation, their mental health, any other aspect of their personality is something which should be fought. I'm very much in tune with the liberal value of Tikkun Olam and Mitzvah Day, which is spearheaded by Laura Marks, is something that I am extremely in favor of. I'm also very much in favor of a liberal attitude towards events in Israel. And I do believe, as the Liberals did recently, that it's important to engage with Ambassador Tzipi Hotovely, because I do believe that her views can evolve in much the same way as the views of other Israeli politicians have. And I congratulate the Liberals on this approach.
Thank you, Richard. Stuart?
As I said before, my views are pretty firm when it comes to discrimination based on race, gender, sexuality, disability, or denomination. Won't compromise. And the same goes with for anti-Semitism. Won't compromise on it. Other priority, strong and constructive support for Israel. Overall, I believe in building bridges, consensus, inclusion, social action, tikkun olam, making the world a better place.
Okay, thank you. David?
So first of all, I mean, obviously I absolutely agree with Amanda that this is the Board of Deputies of British Jews and it has to represent all Jews. And I would say to that part, what we need to do is make sure that the board is putting forward and representing the reform and liberal side of things, to make sure that when there are pictures of Jews in newspapers and magazines, they're not always photos of people in traditional cultural garb, that Jews don't all look one way, and to make sure that progressive Jews are on the table and represented when it comes to discussions around important life cycle events, and that these don't just cater to people of other denominations. I'd say on top of that, gosh, I'm running out of time, that we need to make sure that we are putting forward the progressive view internationally, supporting progressive Jews in Israel and in countries where actually progressive Jews don't have a voice in the representative bodies, places like Hungary. So we need to make sure that we're speaking out for them.
Thank you, David. Gary?
You asked for 3 issues. I think I've got 3. First one is interfaith work. I believe interfaith work is good, and I know progressive Jews largely support it. I like interfaith work which has got an educational component, where Jews actually get to learn a lot more about other religions and faiths, and other religions and faiths get to learn a lot more about Judaism. The second point is an Israel-related point. I don't believe the board should actually be pronouncing matters internal to Israel, but personally, I do support the Women at the Wall movement. I do think that there should be equality in prayer rights, and I think it's absolutely ludicrous that my cousins in Israel, who are native-born Sabras, had to leave the country to get married because they didn't want an Orthodox marriage. Thirdly, and this is something I learned from the great and late Rabbi Albert Friedlander, tolerance. I think it's very important that we show tolerance to people of all views, even if we don't necessarily agree with them. And this is something that I've noticed the Board of Deputies has not been doing in the last 3 years.
Thank you very much. This is a nice short question from Andrew Gilbert. Which divisions would you like to lead, and what would be your big ideas? Starting with Richard. Richard, I think you're on mute. You are on mute. Yeah.
Because my mother was phoning me. I've moved house today. My 99-year-old mother rang and I couldn't ignore her. I studied international law at Manchester University, and I've been interested in international affairs ever since. I have also assisted Andrew Roberts in researching his book about Churchill. And I say that because he spearheads an organization called the Friends of Israel Initiative. So I believe that through my study of the Balfour Declaration and the history of how Israel was born, I am in a position to inspire others in something which fascinates me so much. I've stated that I chair up a division of the Jewish Historical Society, so we have lots of talks about Israel and so on. I'm also a trustee of the Epping Forest Holocaust Educational Trust. So for those reasons, I think I have the experience and the knowledge to lead such a division. But I would be perfectly happy also to lead the interfaith division because I'm a member of the CCJ and so on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Stuart?
I really am agnostic about that. I have a pretty simple kick its butt attitude to fighting anti-Semitism. Yes, there's a lot we can do to refine our approach to it, such as making better use of social media as opposed to simply traditional ones. If I was put in charge of defense, if I was put in charge of international, I would engage with the Israeli government through the channels that we have to deal with the various issues of concern that crop up amongst us and within the community from time to time, constructively, but deal with these things full on. If I was with the Communities Division, I think that implementing the Bush report has got to be a priority. I think that we should look at possibly doing something similar with disabilities and other similar issues in that sphere, but I'm agnostic between them.
Okay, thank you, David.
So my preference would be for the international division. I have a master's in international relations where I focused on anti-Israel bias at the UN. I worked at UN Watch in Geneva, working with diplomats and other organizations. And frankly, I think the board can do more to raise its international profile. So if I were to lead that division, I would make sure that we got membership in ECOSOC, the UN's Economic and Social Council. That would mean that we can speak at consultations with independent experts, with special rapporteurs, that we'd be able to speak at the Human Rights Council, UNESCO, places that are filled with anti-Israel bias and, of course, anti-Semitism. However, if I were to lead the Defence Division, I have expertise there as well. I was the incident analyst at CST. I saw every single incident of anti-Semitism reported anywhere in the UK. If I were to lead the Communities Division, well, I work for a local authority now, so I certainly do a lot when it comes to communities and education. And on education, I definitely think that we need to do more. Sorry, I've run out of time.
Okay, thank you. Gary?
I'm indifferent between the three divisions. If I was asked to lead international, I would want to help in fighting anti-Semitism overseas. If I was asked to lead defence, it's anti-Semitism at home, plus working closely with the CST and with the UJS. As well as supporting defending Brit Millah and Shachita. If I was asked to lead communities, it's focusing on building up Jewish education, plus also other issues such as interfaith work and addressing major issues today like mental health, which is a concern for the Jewish community. However, what's most important to me is the people who are going to help me in that division. And it's a question of ensuring that people are elected in July who are going to do some work. And I go back to the point I made in my speech that I had to seek a meeting with the president and with the CEO and the relevant staff members to ensure we have proper jobs for the divisional members to do when they are elected. There's been too many divisional members across at least 3 of the 4 divisions, the exception being F&O, where they haven't actually done very much work.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Amanda.
Hi, thank you. Well, I was the vice chair of the Communities Division and I'm now chair of the Defence Division. So I've got experience across those 2 divisions. I know what I'm doing on defence, and we need the best people to tackle the issues that we're facing in each of our agendas. So I'd like to have defence so that I can keep doing what I'm doing and do it better. But what I would do is I would set up a programme committee that brings all the divisions together so that we can keep each other informed and we can look at what we can do across divisions so that we're not working in silos, and look at a wide range of events, forums and debates on the issues that we're all working on, so that we can involve all our deputies in helping to inform policy and show the inclusivity that we're all talking about needing, so that we can do everything much more effectively. I'd also work more closely with the regions so that we could take programmes out. We've been very successful with our regional chairman meetings, and I would extend those to other people within regional rep councils so that we can look at other issues.
Thank you, Amanda. Right, the next question is the most popular one that I've had, and I'll read it slowly because it's quite a long one. What do you think of the opposition to the Stephen Bush report on racial inclusivity in the Jewish community, particularly from within parts of the Jewish community and the Jewish press? Starting with Stuart.
Sorry, I didn't hear the whole question.
Okay. What do you think of the opposition to the Stephen Bush report on racial inclusivity in the Jewish community, particularly from within parts of the Jewish community and the Jewish press?
Oh boy, this came up a couple nights ago. It made me feel really bad. I was just hurt. I was ashamed. Sorry, I don't know how we, of all the groups on the planet, can disregard the feedback from people who've been at the receiving end of uneven treatment. Goodness sake. There seems to have been a deliberate conflation of the many recommendations that the report has made and diktat. That just isn't the case. And for goodness sake, no one's saying that we're a bunch of racists, but we can get better and we must. And it's not very different in the end to if we had a survey of women or disabled or other groups that are in a position of disadvantage. And we'd say, you know what, we're not really going to listen to them because it kind of hurts our feelings a bit. I really was hurt. There's very little I feel more passionately about, and I think we really have to seriously look at most of those recommendations.
Okay, thank you. David?
This is broadly something that there is massive consensus on in the community. Whenever you're going to get the tiniest bit of dissent, of course journalists are going to pick up on that. That's what they do. That doesn't mean that makes up a significant part of what the Jewish community in the UK believes. And I think it's quite clear from, if you look at the responses from everyone, from actually from the president of the board through to the chief executive of CST to the heads of denominations, this has been really positively received. We just now need to make sure that it's not just received, but we have to live it. We have to make sure that the organizations within the Jewish community, that our constituencies are living it. And we need to make sure that going forward, it doesn't take tragedy to make us want to work for greater inclusion within our community. It should be something that we're working for every day. And as a progressive Jew, I obviously, very much believe that. That's very much a part of what we live. And I hope to see our synagogues really embracing this report.
Thank you. Gary?
I think the report was excellent. There were 119 recommendations. There was nothing in the recommendations that hit me between the eyeballs that I didn't agree with. I thought it was largely very constructive. A few of them one would think it's going to be difficult to comply with, but they're largely very positive. Focusing on the criticism, I think that one needs to split up constructive from destructive criticism. And I would commend everybody to read Misha Mansour's article on page 5 of the JC last week, which was a combination, which was largely constructive criticism. She was positive about the report. She had some criticism to make, but there was one point she made at the end of her article, which I completely agreed with. Yes, it's right that we look at the different prejudices and we address them, but we also must focus strongly on the issues that unite us. Because when anti-Semites, they don't care if your name is Marie van der Zyl or Jonathan Newman, they hate you. And we have to focus on what unites all of us.
Thank you. Amanda?
I'm really proud of the report and that we were brave enough to actually do it in the first place. Listen, I think we're grown-ups. We need to be real, look at the challenges we have, and we need to accept that there are some areas where we need to do better. There were over 200 testimonies from Black Jews and people of colour. And of course, they were celebrating some of the good things that they experienced, but they also showcased some of the things that we weren't doing so well. And the report, as well as making recommendations for what we can do better, also highlighted what we were doing well and shared the good practice. And so I think that, as others have said, there's lots in there that we can learn from, both for good and to improve. But our job as we go forward is to actually support the community in understanding what those recommendations mean and what they mean for them, and to move forward and actually help them to implement them.
Thank you, Amanda. Richard?
Yes, I think there is a good deal of consensus that this report was a very welcome one and needs to be studied carefully and implemented. I think the fact that perhaps a few people did not agree with all the 119 recommendations, I think one of them was in relation to the extent to which parents and pupils should dictate the curriculum, and another one was in relation to celebrating Ethiopian festivals at school. On those narrow grounds, maybe there is something that one could argue about. But what I think is important when you read a report like this is not just to say, oh yes, our institution should behave in a way which is more liberal. But I think we should look at it as a wake-up call to ourselves, that we should all, as individuals, behave in a way that is more liberal. And when we interact with people who are different to us, we should remember to smile and remember to treat them as equals and remember to be kind.
Thank you very much, Richard. Okay, on to the next question. As you know, many of the deputies' constituents do not know much of what the board does. How can the board raise its profile so that they are much more aware of the board's activities? And we're starting with David on this.
I mean, the board can do so much more to raise its profile. I was speaking just before about how we could raise our profile internationally, for instance, and actually I think speaking at international forums is a really good way that you can show British Jews what we're doing for them, by showing that we're speaking not just behind closed doors and not just to councils, to police forces, to the government here, but internationally to countries around the world. That is a fantastic way that we can raise our profile. But we also need to be going out, making sure that we are running engagement directly with constituencies, that we're having our deputies go back and speak to their constituencies so that they are being directly represented and representative. This should be happening at synagogue councils up and down the country. And frankly, if Jews in these synagogues, in communal organizations, know what the board is doing, that is going to raise our profile, and that is going to make us a more legitimate representative body.
Thank you. Gary?
I find that the deputies' constituencies are often influenced in their thoughts about the board by what the deputies' own experience is. And as I've said in my opening speech, many deputies feel their wallpaper. And the reason is that they are not engaged in a decision-making process of the board. However good the decisions might be, for example, the Chinese Uyghurs campaign, deputies did not vote on it. I'm sure had it been put to a vote, it would have been passed heavily, overwhelmingly, but it wasn't put to a vote, as with so many other of the board's current policies. So I think that you engage deputies by getting them involved in debate, by making the procedure by which motions can be brought to debate, even if the honorary officers don't like the motions, making the procedure for bringing motions easier. For example, getting rid of the need for a division to approve it before it goes to the board. And then you will find deputies will feel engaged because they really are participating in what board policy actually is going to be. Thank you.
Gary. Amanda?
I think we raise our profile when we're doing the right things, when we're doing things that meet the needs of the Jewish community, when we're doing things that that move the needle, then we raise our profile. That's when the media is interested in us. That's when people in the community are interested. Our job is not to have a profile. Our job is to get the job done. And if we focus on getting the job done, then our profile will follow. For me, the strength of the board is the fact that we have 300 deputies out there who should be proud to represent us back in their communities. And when we're doing the right thing, then they'll be representing us in the community.
Thank you, Amanda. Richard?
Well, I did one thing which I hope helped to raise the board's profile above the parapet, and that is that I spent many months negotiating with the BBC for the president of the Board of Deputies to appear on Question Time. And ultimately, they agreed to this when the report on anti-Semitism in the Labour Party was published, and Marie did appear on Question Time. I think she Donald Trump in questions about Israel and the Palestinians, and on Black Lives Matter. And not only did she fly the flagship for the Board of Deputies, but she also flew the flag for she flew the flag for
it's your mother again, I think.
Generally for women as well. I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, so that's how I think. The other thing I think deputies can do is write to newspapers and appear on LBC themselves, and whatever they do in the community, I think should be reported more in the community briefing. Sorry about the interruption.
Thank you, Richard. Stuart?
Okay, I'll have to speak very quickly through a lot of things. I mean, I'm involved at the moment in pushing through a digital marketing campaign that will increase awareness of what we are doing specifically right across the board. Amanda is fully aware of this, and this is going to help. Also, in my manifesto, a skills-based ambassadors program to empower deputies to use their skills to represent the board within and outside the community. That will help when they're working within the community and motivate them. The reality is that most deputies are very good at reporting back to their communities, but there is always a bit of a gap between their enthusiasm and what people back at base feel. Can't be helped, but we can only do what we can do. Look, there's a tendency to catastrophize our situation, but here's the reality. We have, for many years, not had anything like so many deputies or represented organizations as we have at the moment. We're not failing, we can simply do better. That's really the message I would give.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. This might be the last question because we are due to finish at 7:30, so we're going to slightly overrun. Okay, what should the board be doing to combat anti-Semitism, both in the wider community and also on campus? And we're starting with Gary on this one.
Firstly, we need to call out far more anti-Semitic incidents than we are. It seems to be quite selective when the board is criticising anti-Semitic matters. It doesn't seem to be a general focus on it, in my view. Yes, we did extremely well with regard to the Labour Party and Corbyn and a number of other incidents, but there are so many things that happen that we're not actually calling out. So we need to get more involved in that. Secondly, I think that to help assist in that objective, we need to have a small media division, maybe half a dozen deputies, perhaps 2 each from Defence, International and Communities, who would watch the news closely and ensure they work together with the HOs and with the staff to ensure that everything is covered. I think that we need to, as I say, to be more upfront in what we're saying and doing. Thank you.
Thank Amanda?
Well, I think it's doing what we're doing and doing more of it. The key thing is it's tackling anti-Semitism wherever it manifests. The last few years it's been about the Labour Party, but we're also tackling anti-Semitism in all political parties. I've had meetings across the last 3 years with Labour, with Conservative, with the Lib Dems, and we've recently got Plaid Cymru to adopt IRA with all its examples when they did their full review of anti-Semitism in the party. It's about looking at other institutions, about trade unions around and at the grassroots levels, at local councils and local parties. It's about looking at disciplinary processes. It's absolutely about collaborating with allies and influencers in different ways. That could be Friends of Israel groups, communal partners, MPs, current and former, social media influencers. It's tackling anti-Semitism online, and it's monitoring activity. There's a great role for deputies here, and we've been trying that out in our division this year, but a real role for deputies to look and find and report it into us so that we can root it out, complain about it, and tackle it. And that's Amanda. Before I start talking about media.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda. Richard?
Yes, of course, there is a grave problem with regard to anti-Semitism, and it does appear to be getting worse now. As the late Lord Sachs says, it's a light sleeper. But by the same token, I'd like to recite an anecdote from my own experience that I edit a Facebook group called the Jewish Historical Society, which is open to all. And I can tell you, every day we are getting hundreds of applications from Mohammeds and Aishas and Ishmaels. A lot of people are very interested in the Jewish story and in our history. And I think that we shouldn't be too downhearted and too depressed. I think there are some great signs, especially with the Abraham Records, that there is a genuine desire to connect with each other. And I think that the Mitzvah Day, for example, is a wonderful way of showing the other communities that although we care to support ourselves, we care for others as well. And that to me is the heart of Tikkun Olam.
Richard. Stuart?
I have a pretty uncompromising view of how to fight anti-Semitism, and I don't have any substantial disagreements with any of the other candidates, what they've said already or what David's likely to say. For example, I do think that we need to be savvier in terms of using media, not just the traditional media, but also digital media to fight what's going on in that space. I do think perhaps we have to remember that education is part of the struggle. It's not just about fighting things head on. But in the end, I would really just endorse, in a sense, a synthesis of what all the others have been saying about this. I think it is such a serious issue. We can't shy away from it. Perhaps it is our #1 priority. What a shame it has to be. What a shame it has to be. Let us fine tune everything else instead of this. It takes up so much of our energy, but there it is. So we can't compromise.
Thank you, Stuart. David?
Fighting anti-Semitism has to come from basically every angle, because that is where anti-Semitism comes from. What we need to do is actually start, from a really young age. We need to make sure that there is good religious education in school. We need to make sure that non-Jewish children have exposure with what Judaism is, at what anti-Semitism is, and try and start to understand that nuance there. Because actually, if we were able to make sure that children understand Judaism and anti-Semitism, then that's going to be the best way for us to fight anti-Semitism in the future. We need to make sure that we are doing dip sampling with police forces, with social media companies, so that we are speaking to them when they say, this has been reported as anti-Semitic, do you think that it is? We should be engaging with those conversations up and down the country, local authorities, police forces, social media companies, mainstream media companies. And with campuses, we need to make sure that universities are adopting IRA and that they're being held to it. We need to work not just with vice chancellors, but with students and with chairs of university councils. We need to come at this from every angle.
Okay, thank you very much. We are coming to the end, so I think we haven't got any more time for any more questions, unfortunately. Maybe next time we can have a longer session, but anyway, We're going to go to closing remarks from all candidates now. So 1 minute for closing remarks, please. And we're starting with Stuart.
Okay, keep it quite simple. To recap my priorities, fight anti-Semitism and discrimination. Why? Because this fight is everyone's fight. Listen to women deputies, young deputies, regional deputies, and others who may feel that the playing field is uneven. Look at disabilities, give deputies a greater voice and a greater role. In a sense, strip the wallpaper. Have more community and progressive social engagement alongside political advocacy. I think that my work as treasurer across 6 years means that I do understand how the board works. And as a deputy, I've spent a dozen years listening and learning to many dozens of deputies. The board is not perfect, but in the end, at its best, it does represent us at our best. And whatever your views or affiliation, whether you're Reform, Liberal or Majority or someone from one of the others, if you want someone with a proven track record of listening and teamwork and getting things done, I'm possibly worth your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Richard?
What I think is important is that we should be in a position to tell deputies that they themselves can do so much and be encouraged to do things. For example, the anti-Semitism on the campus. It's very easy to go to a website of an individual university and look up the email address of a professor, such as Professor Miller at Bristol University, and simply write to these academics and argue with them and reason with them and tell them why, from your reading of history, you disagree with them. It's not just a question of what the honorary officers can do. I think if every deputy can feel empowered to take part in the great ideal of everybody being democratic, that would be something I would love to facilitate. Just finally, then, I would look forward to a day, a messianic era of tikkun olam, when people of all races and creeds can walk together in majesty, in justice, and in peace.
Thank you very much, Richard. Gary?
The definition of an election issue is not necessarily the most important issue. It isn't the most important issue on which the candidates are divided. Anti-Semitism is, I believe, undoubtedly the most important issue, but you will have heard from your answer to an earlier question that you can barely put a wafer between the views of the five of us. Similarly, on any issues relating to the celebration of Jewish life, I would also say there's very little difference. Even on Israel, not very much difference. Where the difference comes is when we talk about democracy at the board. I'm the only candidate, I believe, who has called for all major board decisions to be put to the deputies for them to vote on, discuss, debate, and then vote, rather than just have the honorary officers make those decisions. That is the way we get deputies engaged. That is the election issue, and that is why I am calling for your first preference votes, because I don't believe the other candidates necessarily agree with me.
Thank you, Gary. David?
This evening, I've spoken about who I am and what I want to achieve as Vice President of the Board. I have a track record standing up for the Jewish community, which I've done at home and around the world. I do this as a member of our international division, a trustee of EHRS and the London Jewish Forum, and in my work at Barnet Council. I did this at CST, at UN Watch, and as president of the Students' Union. Every step of the way, I've worked to build allies with other communities, making sure that we're never having to fight alone. I'll continue to do this as Vice President and work tirelessly for a better, more representative board fit for the future. I will enact policies to ensure that we are truly engaging with deputies to really understand what our community wants and needs, and working with companies, police forces, councils and the government to make sure that all British Jews can practice their Judaism freely and safely. In order to do this, I ask, please support me with your first preference vote to be Vice President at our Board of Deputies. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Amanda?
I'm reflective, respectful and open to new ideas. I hope you found me to be inclusive, creative, fair, hardworking, and most important, effective. Don't mistake my competence and pragmatism, my tendency for strategy and planning, or my quiet, thoughtful engagement for someone with a lack of passion or innovation. I've demonstrated that I bring that to the table too, and that I can make a difference for our whole community. I'm the deputy for Hampstead United Synagogue, but my commitment is to all British Jews of every denomination, gender, region, age, and ability, and is to work towards a representative board that actively engages and uses the skills and expertise of deputies, one that makes an impact on the issues that matter so that we can build a Jewish community that is strong, secure, vibrant, and above all, united. I believe that my efforts have made things better for the British Jewish community, and I'm asking for your vote so that I can give you another 3 years and I can do even more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I'd just like to say thank you very much to all the candidates, and thank you especially for keeping to time. It was really good of you. And I think we've all learnt quite a lot about where you think the board's going to be going. So it'll be a very interesting 3 years, I think, to see you and how you actually propose to develop the board. So finally, I would like to hand over to Amit from the Reform Judaism to give a final thanks and say goodbye. Thank you. Over to you, Amit.
Good evening, everyone. I'll be very quick, I promise. My name is Amit Handelsman, and I'm Director of Community Partnership for Southern Communities at Reform Judaism. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. The first thing that I learned in the Reform movement in Israel before Tikkun Olam is the value of informed decision making, and this is what we did. Sorry?
Carry on. I think someone's just not muting.
So before we learned about Tikkun Olam, we learned about the value of informed decision making, and this is really what we were all doing this evening, listening and making informed decision before these elections for the Board of Deputies. Thank you so much for Marie and Jonathan for joining us this evening, and Karen for moderating, and our 5 vice presidents candidates, with Tony, and to all of you, our deputies, progressive deputies from the Reform movement and liberal Judaism. You are amplifying our voices in the public sphere, and you're doing a fantastic job as volunteers, and we really do appreciate your time here this evening and throughout the year working in the Board of Deputies representing our movements. And also a quick welcome and thank you for joining deputies from Masorti movement who joined us this evening as well. Last point and the invitation for you to join the conversation with Stephen Bush, who chaired the Board of Deputies Commission on Racial Inclusivity, who will speak at Liberal Judaism Biannual on Sunday. I'm sure if you go to the website, you can find all the details, how to log in and how to join the conversation with Stephen and about his and about the Commission. Thank you so much for representing the movements, for voting with your values and our values, and wishing you good evening and Shabbat Shalom.